Hello there, and welcome to Preprints in Motion, the podcast taking a deep dive in the fast-paced world of preprints.
Join us as we sit down with early career researchers, discuss their latest preprint, and find out about their journey through the muddy marshes of academia.
Hit that subscribe button, leave a rating, and support us by heading over to buymeacoffee.com/preprints. But for now, let's get into the show.
Today we are going to be learning about the much bigger world of ants than you might expect.
So we always start in the same place with everyone we have on, which is to ask you to introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of what your background is.
So my name is Cristian Klunk. I'm a Brazilian researcher having a postdoc position here in Germany. I have a bachelor degree in biology, a master's and a doctorate degree in ecology. I did this in Brazil, and my PhD actually was also in co-tutel with a university here in Germany, where I am now, the Technical University of Darmstadt. And since my bachelor's, I study ants and ecology, just like changing my main research lines, basic ecology, a bit of ecophysiology, and then in my doctorate I moved to functional morphology and biomechanics, and I'm more focused now in this postdoc position. And also before coming here to Germany, I also had a quick postdoc position in Brazil.
And we're going to be talking a lot about ants, which seems to be a bit of a theme throughout your career. So could you talk a little bit about what this preprint, why you undertook this preprint, and what sort of the main findings are?
The idea of my thesis, just to contextualize, was to study the morphological diversity of ants in a functional point of view, especially looking into the mandibles and the heads of ants. Because ants the workers use their mandibles to do most of the stuff they have to do. So they show a huge morphological diversity, like the shape of the mandibles varies considerably among the lineages. And our idea was to test functionally how this morphological variation could be an adaptive response to the demands of bite, for example. And then we choose an approach, a simulation approach that is very common in many engineering fields. It's the finite element analysis, where you can simulate different loading conditions in a structure and estimate how it responds in terms of deformation, distribution of stresses, and things like that. And from 30, 40 years ago, it started to become more common to see this approach in biology to answer a lot of questions regarding functional morphology, like looking into fossils and into current lineages, how these different shapes can be adaptive in terms of what the animals are doing and other organisms too. But for invertebrates, it's becoming more common nowadays. It's not something that is so traditional in studying functional morphology of invertebrates, and there was only one paper on this with ants so far when I started my PhD. So me and my advisor at that point thought that this could be an interesting approach. And then we come on this preprint, where we were looking into the effect of the ant head shape, of this huge diversity of ant head shapes that we observe. We want to investigate if this could be somehow related to the mechanical demands of the contraction of the mandibular muscles. The mandibular muscles of ants are really huge. They occupy most of the internal volume of ants. At some points, more than 2/3 of the internal volume of the ant head are only the muscles for closing the mandibles. And we want to investigate this in an evolutionary large scale. So we took pictures of ant head shapes, of ant heads that are available in on online repositories. And then we create bidimensional models of these heads, and we use an approach called morphometric geometrics to quantify this morphological diversity. We included like more than 90% of genus in our sampling. I don't remember exactly the number, but I can tell you later more precisely, but more than 500 species, I guess. And then we quantified the morphological variation and generated theoretical head shapes that represents all this morphological variation with we constructed what we call a morphospace of ant head shapes. And then from this morphospace, we picked up a few representative shapes that span the entire morphospace and tested the effect of the mandibular muscle contraction to see, and then we also plotted the distribution of current and head shapes in this morphospace, and we saw that there are some parts of this morphospace that are really empty, and there is a huge concentration at a small part of the morphospace. And then our idea was to test if there are some biomechanical functional limitations that explain why some head shapes did not evolve in ants, and why other head shapes are much more common in current ant lineages. That was the main idea with this paper. And what we found is that we saw some signs of biomechanical limitations regarding some regions of the morphospace that are really empty. For example, head shapes that show a huge distribution of high level stresses, or some head shapes that concentrate too much stress at small areas of the head, which means that if you have a lot of stress being concentrated in a small area, and these stresses are generated by cycles of loading, like ants use the mandibles all the time, so they are always being loaded. So this means that these areas can be under a certain degree of chance of developing some kind of failure, cuticular failure. And the head shape that is more close to the most common head shape that we observe among ants, it shows like a trade-off between spreading too much stress towards the head or concentrated too much stress. So it seems that it is able to spread a bit more of stress over the head as a whole, avoiding to concentrate too much stress at specific areas, which can be a sign of an adaptation to deal with this loading of the mandibular closing muscles.
So were these different head shapes related to specific environmental stresses that certain ant species would be subjected to, or is it more about geographical distribution?
We did not analyze any effect of ecology or geographic distribution at this point. It seems to be more related to some evolutionary constraints, the head shape in general. Something that some authors are, including ourselves, are trying to look into is how the diet can influence mandible and head shape, because some ants are more generalists, other ants are more specialists, and we have some ants that are specialized in eating seeds, for example, which are really stiff and dog food items, and many predatory ants, they predate on other insects or arthropods in general, which also have the exoskeleton, so it's also a kind of mechanical demanding food source. So far, no one find a real clear relationship between mandible or head shape and diet. Something that could help us in the future, it's something that I am also looking into now, is also the effect of the material properties of the cuticle, which is another stuff, but trying to look beyond only the shape of the structures, but also how they are constituted, because we know that there is a huge diversity in the material mechanical properties of the cuticle.
It was cool to see that a lot of what you were doing was based on data that you were able to get from this online repository. My PhD was also based on a lot of data that was in an online repository. So I didn't do it, my supervisor did, but they went through a lot of images and sort of put the initial preliminary data together. I was going to ask this later, but I'm going to ask it now. Could you talk a little bit about how important that repository was to this particular bit of work and how that was used to inform the questions you were asking, or the kind of questions you could ask?
That's like extremely important because my PhD, I did most of my PhD was during COVID time, so I had no access to lab and other stuff, and then we had to change our main approach because these mechanical simulations were supposed to be only part of my PhD. I would also have lab work, and at that point starting to look into material properties too, but then it was impossible. And we have, for ants, we are very lucky because we have many online repositories which are curated by professionals, taxonomists, systematics, and so we have a huge repository of ants and pictures from different points of view, which are really important to help us to identify ants and to know their distribution, because the pictures are associated with the location of collection, of sampling and so on. So it is a huge venue for exploring many different kinds of questions. The pictures are nice quality, and then they are prompt to be used for approaches like quantifying the morphological variation, measure sizes of structures of whole body, and so you can think on a lot of questions regarding the morphological evolution and things like that. We have good phylogenies available to do phylogenetic statistical methods, to explore phylogenetic statistical methods. And could you remind me the other part of the question? Sorry.
I think you've answered it, actually. It was, what kind of questions does this allow you to address?
Yeah. This, like, you can think in a lot of also ecological questions, because you have the location of these where these ants are, and since this repository has samples from the entire world, from most of the lineages of ants in terms of at the genus level at least. So you can think in a lot of evolutionary and ecological questions, and once you have the pictures, you can think about morphological questions, and also one important thing in terms of the relationship between ant distribution or organism distribution and the environment. For ants or insects in general, is the color of the cuticle, because you can think about questions regarding the color of the cuticle and thermal effects, and also relationship with humidity, because the presence of darker cuticles can be related to high resistance to desiccation, things like that. And then once you have all this information, you can explore a lot of morphological, ecological, and evolutionary questions.
And is all of that uploaded by scientists, or is this something that the general public get involved with as well?
This repository with ant pictures, it's curated by professionals like professors and scientists in general. There are some repositories also where like people in general can send pictures and inform where these ants or other organisms were found, and then at some point some scientists can take a look and confirm if it makes sense or not. But in general, these online repositories that we use are curated by scientists, and it's more made by scientists for scientists, but the general public can access it. Like I know that there are many people that have curiosity about ants, and even sometimes keep ants at their homes as like pets, so they can understand a lot of the diversity of shape, of color, and distribution of ants by accessing these online repositories.
Yeah, feels like a great opportunity for a citizen science project somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So, how many ant species are there? How many different families are there?
Currently, we have around 14 15,000 species described for the entire world. But this number is obviously higher because we know from many museum and university collections that they have undescribed specimens, but people know that they are different from what is described, but it demands a lot of work to look into these specimens and relate them with the other species and give a name and things like that. So I don't know any estimation of how much species of ants we actually have, but what we have described is between 14 and 15,000 species. And we also have lineages that are completely extinct now, fossil lineages, and even some really weird and different ant lineages that were extinct around 1,000 million years ago.
A lot more than I thought there would be. So actually, and you raised a good point there. So my understanding of AntWeb was that it did have images from library collection and museum collections. So presumably there are some data in there, at least, that is from potentially now extinct species. I might be wrong, but I mean, are there plans to look back in that? Because you're taking an evolutionary viewpoint to what you're doing with sort of the current species, but do you plan at some point in the future to relate that back to past species, or is that not possible to do with the data?
You mean with pictures, or?
With whatever data you can get. I mean, I don't know how much of a skeleton of an ant sort of survives.
Oh yeah, we have good fossils of ants, especially those that were preserved in amber, which is a resin of many tree species do that, and so the ants are capturing this resin, and then they stay really well preserved for millions and millions of years. Like our better estimation of the origin of ants is a few million years, between 100 and 120 million years, more or less, is the origin of ants. And we have good fossils of this beginning of the diversification of ants. Even recently, a Brazilian group described what is probably the oldest ant ever known so far. Then it was not from amber, it was another kind of fossil. And yeah, for sure I can, like the things that I am doing now in terms of functional morphology and biomechanics, there are a lot of things that can be done and are already being done regarding fossil material. One of the main tools that we have nowadays is microtomography, which is a technique. It's like a tomograph that we use in medicine, but at another scale, a much smaller scale, in which you can scan the organism and then use this data to generate a three-dimensional reconstruction of the organism. And so we do this with living ants, with current ants, but you can also use this with fossils. You just you put the fossil there, you do the scan, and then you can reconstruct the internal and external morphology in a really huge level of detail. Of course, that especially for the internal morphology, much of it is not preserved, like soft tissues, most of them are not preserved, but there are some rare cases that we can recover a part of the soft tissue. But still, you can think about a lot of questions, like test how the mandibles could work in that specimen, how they move, and how this could be useful, adaptive for catching prey, for example. And then you can test hypotheses if these species were really predatory or not. You can relate this with what we know about the shape of the head and the mandible of current lineages and what we know of the ecology of current lineages, because this is what we know. We can go to the field and see, and then you can relate the shape of the fossil ants with the shape of the current lineages and see if there are some signs of, oh, these species can probably was a predatory species or a more generalist species. You can look into what is possible about internal morphology and see if the digestive system looks like more similar to a species that feed more on liquids or more on solid food and things like that.
And what do you want to do next, building on from this? What's the next bit of work?
In the short time, I would say explore more the material properties, and we know that many arthropods, they concentrate transition metals in their cuticle at the specific points of structures, like the tip of stings or the tip of mandibles, structures that are used to puncture, to bite, to cut. And we are beginning to explore how this can influence the material properties of the cuticle, and how this can be adaptive to these organisms in terms of their diet or their defensive behaviors and things like that. And in another level, since I am ecologist, I would like to bring this knowledge into to try to understand the distribution of species based on the functional morphology and also the macroevolution of the species based on this knowledge on the functional morphology of ants. So like functional ecology is something that I am interested in exploring more in the future, like to relate the distribution of species with their shape, with their morphology, and see if the morphology reflects also the environment at some point. And like more macroecological, macroevolutionary questions.
So my background is very much more immunology, cell biology stuff, and because I'm not confident in my ability to talk to people outside of those fields, we tend to get a lot of guests on who fall into those fields because it's easy for me. So it's really nice to speak to someone who's excited about something that is just totally different to what I would normally do and normally talk to. I'm learning a lot about ants. So one thing I can talk about is preprinting. When it comes to preprinting, who made that decision? Why did you choose to preprint this work instead of just skipping straight to submitting to a journal and publishing it?
Yeah, the first time that I published a preprint, it was an idea of my advisor of my PhD, which is also a co-author of this preprint that we are talking about. At that point, I did not have too much idea about this process of preprint, why we should publish a preprint if at the end we will also submit it to a scientific journal and have it published there. But then I realized that much more people can have access to your work if you made it available as a preprint, because usually we submit to journals and we don't pay open access all the time. We don't have money to pay open access for all the articles that we publish. So the preprint is a manner to make your work available without the people having to write you to have access to your work and wait until the manuscript is published. And on the other side is also an opportunity to have people looking into your work before you have it published and maybe suggest something, see something that might be wrong or could be improved before having it submitted or before having it published. Because usually when you submit a manuscript, your work will be evaluated by 2 reviewers, which not necessarily, and in most cases, they cannot be specialists in all the stuff that you do. It's more common to have really multidisciplinary works. My works are usually very multidisciplinary. I have collaborations with engineering and also biologists with other backgrounds. So it's impossible to find 1 or 2 reviewers that can evaluate all the main parts of the main possible issues of your manuscript. And then once this manuscript is available for the public in general for free before submitting, you have the chance to have it kind of reviewed by the scientific community at a larger scale and have received some tips, some suggestions, or not only for your manuscript but also for future work.
Really good example of that recently with I think it was an AI manuscript, and it was under revision, so it would pass the editor and the first part of the reviewers, and because it had been pre-printed and the claims were a bit surprising, it got quite a lot of attention on the preprint, and that revealed that it was actually a load of rubbish. but 2 reviewers didn't pick up on that. So big benefit of preprints.
Mm-hmm.
You said earlier in the discussion that you did your PhD sort of right during COVID. I moved to do my first postdoc during the pandemic, and that was a very interesting experience. How did you find doing a PhD when I don't know what it was like where you were in terms of being locked down and not being able to leave the house and stuff, but there were still a lot of restrictions around the world going on. So how was that as an experience?
It was intense. The COVID outspread was in the transition of my first to my second year of the PhD, and as I said, the plans of my project were a bit different. And then, of course, in the beginning, we thought, oh, this will last like 1-2 months, and then everything will be okay. And then the time passed, and we at some point realized that, okay, the things will not be okay so soon, and then we have to change everything. I was living alone at that point in an apartment, kind of far from my family because I was in another city. So it was like staying alone, chatting with people online and doing my work, and going out basically to going to the supermarket and stuff like that. And then at some point I had the opportunity to make an interchange, even during COVID. And I came here to Germany, the same university I'm now, because the group here has a lot of microcity data of ends, and this could be a huge source of data for my thesis, because then we move my thesis to be a completely computer-based thesis doing simulations and what I can do at home with my PC. And then I got a scholarship for 6 months here in Germany, but because of the higher levels of cases in Europe, it was around the second year of my PhD, then we were not allowed to go out of Brazil at that point. And then I had to postpone 2 times and go 1 year later. There were a lot of cases in Europe at that point, but I was vaccinated, so I could travel and do this interchange. And it was like very different, for kind of a different world, because I have classes online. I talk with my advisor only online. Sometimes I met someone to talk a bit, but it was really different. And at least we had some hopes that the behavior of the people would change after pandemics and pay more attention into biodiversity losses and climate change and all this stuff that we discussed a lot during pandemics, the reasons why the virus spread so fast and how it evolved to and moved from animals to humans. But now it's a kind of disappointing that it seems that nothing changed, or at least that did not change so much as we expected.
Yeah, you've basically just said a whole bunch of things the entire US government would now disagree with you. I mean, they're wrong. They're the ones who are wrong. But yeah, it is really sad to see how quickly things... And they didn't even go back to what they used to be. They've regressed way worse. It's it's not a great time to be a scientist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So on that happy note, you also mentioned that you've got this sort of double affiliation between Brazil and Germany. So these are 2 different cultures, different sort of research environments. How is that as a researcher? Because a lot of people tend to have their sort of one affiliation and then they'll move and they'll go somewhere else. It's not super common to have that double affiliation, that duplicated experience. So what are the benefits of that, would you say?
I think it's a really nice experience, not only for professional skills, but also a really nice personal experience. That there are all these cultural differences, but also here I am in a really international group. We have researchers for many different parts of the world and partnership with universities in China, in Ecuador, and sometimes there is an exchange of researchers on that basis. There have also some differences in the working culture. Of course, we have, I observe here in Germany, we have a better infrastructure to doing research, although Brazil is improving somehow in many aspects, but still in terms of infrastructure to like have a fully founded research project sometimes is hard. You have to rely on your payment and trying to find a way to do your research if it involves a lot of lab stuff and structure. But like for me, it was really nice also to practice and improve my language skills, expand my network, which is really important for doing science. Once you go out of you finish your PhD and then you start to walk more on your foot for finding a position and things like that. You have to have a good network, and it's hard to do it if you only stay at the same university from your bachelor's until the end of your PhD without going to conferences, talking with other people, showing your work. Because okay, you can publish as many manuscripts you want, but it doesn't guarantee that you will be viewed by many people. So it's nice to go to other universities, go to conferences and talk with people, and sometimes also write to people to make yourself available to discuss with other people.
Yeah, I mean, that networking is really, really important, and it's not about the science you do. It's personal, right? It's personal relationships, and that's why it is really important to actually try and get them in person and go to things to meet people.
Yeah, and also sometimes you realize that you can have access to resources, infrastructure for your own research, which you cannot do in your country or in your institution, but maybe you can meet someone that can help you with that and exchange samples, material, and make such kind of collaborations.
Yeah, and that diverse sort of viewpoints network that you're talking about as well. I mean, more important than ever, given particularly what's happening in the US, but also Hungary and other places around the world are in many ways ahead of what the US is currently doing. I don't think you can overstate how valuable that kind of diversity of voices are and experiences, and like you said, right, different cultures and ways of doing things and what's available, and it just, to me, that is science.
Different research lines also, they're different but somehow related to your research, and then you can expand the view of your own research lines and maybe add some questions that you never thought about.
So you're still quite early in the academic career. Is this the plan to stay in academia, or is the plan to do a couple of postdocs and go do something different?
So far, I'm still looking for staying in the academia. I would like to I like to do research, and I also like to. I don't have too much experience in teaching, but I also feel nice in teaching, like preparing classes and things like that, because it's also a great opportunity to study more some topics and then explore them. Yes, I definitely would like to stay in academia, but of course looking for a permanent position at some point. But until then, I will probably have some more years into jumping into postdoc positions. I don't know where, because I'm liking to live here in Germany and I'm open to stay here, but I am also open to return to Brazil, and it would be nice to at some point return to Brazil and share what I learned abroad and return it to my home country. But I also open for going to other countries. It's like, our life now is like following the opportunities and see what's better at that moment until you have to look into another position.
It's nice. I hear a lot of people say that from people who are currently working in a different country to where they were born. A lot of them tend to say it would be nice to bring my experience and what I've learned back to my home country. It's nice to hear that. As someone who's only ever worked in the UK, I get out. All right, well, I think that's the end of my questions. Unless there's anything you particularly want to discuss.
I cannot think in any point that we miss it so far.
Good. I'm going to take that as I did a good job.
No, it was really.
So, but thank you so much. That was a really interesting chat. I learned a lot about ants that I didn't know, and it genuinely really nice to talk to somebody who is not in my kind of space and background, because diversity of views. It's really good to actually branch out for me a little bit as well. So I've enjoyed this a lot.
Me too.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it's nice to have space to talk a bit about our work. That's not only conferences and manuscripts.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where the podcast came from. So I did some stuff during the pandemic, looking at the pandemic, and I was still postdoc at the time, but because I was the lead author, I got quite a lot of these kind of opportunities, and it just felt a bit weird doing it. Because looking back at the other work I'd done in the lab, I would never get to talk about it in that kind of way. And yeah, I just wanted to give other PhDs and postdocs that kind of opportunity, because we do all the work in the labs and the field, and it's nice to get the attention and talk about it. And we're just as passionate as the people running the lab.
Yeah, and it also reminds me of another point that maybe it's worth to mention, but the importance of trying to communicate more with society, because we are generate a lot of knowledge, but it's kind of not reaching society, and especially our leaders. So we are discussing global warming for decades, and the loss of biodiversity, and the outspread of viruses and other diseases, and nothing changes that much in terms of political decisions and things like that. So it's nice to have this opportunity to talk and to try to reach people outside of academia. But I also always said that maybe I don't have the skills to really communicate with people outside academia. So it's also important to have people like professionals of other areas that are really good at it, like journalists and professionals like that can help us to spread what we are doing, and they can reach people more easily maybe than us.
Right, that is a great point. When people ask me what the future of science publishing is going to look like, that's kind of the answer I now give. I think it is going to be less about sharing stuff for us and more about sharing stuff that is trustworthy, and that just like the general person on the street could read and say, I might not understand it all, but okay, I trust this as a source of information. I think that's probably the future, and science communication more important than ever.
Yeah, and it's not easy to do that.
It's not. No.
You will have much more experience than me, of course.
That's not to say I'm any good at it, though. I just do it. Anyway, we'll end it there. Thank you so much again.
And that's the show, folks. If you enjoyed listening, then hit that subscribe button to get the latest updates straight to wherever it is you're listening. Don't forget to rate us on Spotify. Until next time, have a good week.
This podcast was produced by Rippling Ideas, turning ideas into waves.